My name is Isabella. I'm 28 years old, and I will never forget the night my own family laughed at me like I was a joke. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, one of those routine gatherings where the table was always full, the wine flowed, and Lila, my older sister, soaked up all the attention. The roast was on the table, the chatter loud, and I was trying, as always, to simply blend into the background, to survive the night without becoming the punchline. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're at the right side. Anyways, it started innocently enough. My dad was bragging about how Lila had been invited to another gala with her fiancé. My mom smiled, her eyes glowing with pride. The conversation revolved around her as usual, and I stayed quiet, poking at the potatoes on my plate. Then Lila turned to me with that smirk she'd perfected since childhood, the one that always meant trouble. "So, Bella," she drawled, loud enough to make sure everyone's attention swung to me. "How does it feel to be the ugly one?" For a second, the air left the room. My fork clattered against the plate. I thought surely someone would shut her down. But then, laughter. First a snort from my father, then my mother's chuckle, then the ripple of amusement spreading around the table as cousins, uncles, aunts all joined in. The sound grew, filling the room like a wave crashing over me. I sat frozen, my face burning hot, my body locked in place. It was as if I had been stripped bare under the bright light of the chandelier, reduced to nothing more than the cruelest punchline. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table, to scream at them to stop. But my voice wouldn't come. I stared at my plate, at the smear of gravy and untouched bread roll, trying not to let the tears sting my eyes. Lila laughed the loudest, tossing her hair back, basking in the spotlight she had created by dimming mine. My mother finally touched her arm, murmuring, "Lila, that's not nice." But the words were hollow, a formality, and even she was still smiling. My father shook his head like it was just harmless sibling teasing, and the conversation rolled on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had. The room blurred. Their voices became distant echoes, muffled by the roaring in my ears. I couldn't taste the food anymore. I couldn't even hear the clinking of silverware. All I could hear was her voice, seared into me. "How does it feel to be the ugly one?" That night, I realized the truth. This wasn't just a cruel joke. This was who I was to them. The role I had been cast in since childhood, now put into words and sealed with laughter. I wasn't just less than. I was the scapegoat, the target, the ugly one. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I sat in silence, swallowed the humiliation, and felt something inside me crack. Because for the first time, I understood that nothing I ever did would change what I was to them. And in that moment, surrounded by their laughter, I had never felt more alone. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. The Hartmans, my parents, my sister Lila, and me, were the picture of suburban success. The colonial-style house sat on a quiet street lined with maples, its lawn trimmed to perfection, its shutters freshly painted every summer. Neighbors admired the pool out back, the cars in the driveway, the golden retriever chasing after tennis balls. We were the kind of family people pointed to and whispered, "They've got it all together." Every December, my mother would organize holiday photo shoots. Matching sweaters, coordinated smiles, carefully staged by the fireplace or out in the snow. The cards went out to relatives, co-workers, and anyone who needed reminding of just how wholesome and enviable we were. At barbecues, Dad stood at the grill in his polo shirt, beer in hand, flipping burgers while the neighborhood laughed and praised his cooking. Lila, of course, shone like the centerpiece in every scene. She always knew how to tilt her head just right, how to flash that confident smile that pulled people in. I smiled in the pictures too, but mine always felt stiff, like a mask I couldn't peel off. Behind those images was another story, one no camera ever caught. The perfect family wasn't perfect at all. Behind closed doors, there were constant comparisons. My parents couldn't resist. "Look at Lila's report card," my mother would say, holding up straight A's like they were trophies. "She never has to be reminded to study." If I brought home an A minus, the first question was why it wasn't an A. My achievements never stood on their own. They were always measured against hers and always came up short. The cruelty wasn't loud. It was subtle, wrapped in jokes, in sighs, in backhanded compliments that landed like slaps. When relatives visited, Lila was paraded in front of them like a prize, while I was introduced as the quiet one, or the stubborn one. I can still remember one Thanksgiving when a cousin said I looked tired. My mother laughed lightly and replied, "That's just Bella." Next to Lila, anyone would look tired. They chuckled, not even realizing how sharp the words had cut. Even the pool, that shining jewel of our backyard, held memories I couldn't erase. Lila would invite friends over, and I was allowed to swim too, but always as the background character. Once, when I beat her in a race across the pool, she whined to Dad, who quickly assured her she was still the star athlete of the family. My victory was brushed aside, forgotten before I even climbed out of the water. The facade was spotless, but the truth was heavy. It pressed down on me every day, reminding me that my worth in this family was conditional, tied to how I compared to my sister. And since she always stood in the light, I was destined to live in shadow. People saw a family of smiles and laughter, but I knew better. I knew that the perfect Hartman family portrait was only ever half the picture, and the missing half was me. Lila was always the star, and everyone made sure I knew it. From the time we were little, it seemed like she had been born with a spotlight following her around. Teachers adored her. Relatives gushed over her. My parents spoke her name with a kind of reverence, like everything she touched turned to gold. And me? I was the background, the afterthought, the other one. At school events, Lila was always front and center. I can still remember her piano recital when she was 12. She played a flawless piece, her hair tied in a perfect ribbon, her dress pressed without a wrinkle. When she bowed, the crowd erupted in applause. My mother's hands clapped furiously, my father whistled proudly, and when it was over, they hugged her so tightly I thought she might disappear in their arms. Later that same week, I performed in the school play. I had worked for months to memorize my lines, nervous but determined to do well. I looked out into the crowd and saw them there, but their eyes weren't on me. They were talking quietly, checking their watches. When the curtain fell, they clapped politely but never said a word about my performance. It was always like that. If Lila got an A, it was brilliance. If I got an A, it was expected. If she joined a club, it was leadership. If I did, it was just something to fill my time. Lila's science fair project once won second place, and my parents celebrated like she had cured cancer. I won first the following year, and my father patted me on the shoulder with a flat, "Good job," before asking what Lila was working on next. Compliments flowed to her like water. "She's so beautiful. She's so graceful. She's going places." I heard those words every day, dripping from the mouths of family friends, teachers, neighbors. I, on the other hand, was always compared. Isabella's sweet, but she's not as outgoing as Lila. She's pretty in her own way, but Lila, well, look at her. Always that but, the word that erased me no matter what came before it. Even at home, her pictures covered the walls, professional portraits of her in pageant dresses, framed certificates, smiling snapshots of her surrounded by friends. My photos were tucked into a small corner in the hallway, mostly school pictures where I hadn't even been told to fix my hair. Walking past those walls was like walking through a museum dedicated to my sister, a shrine to her perfection. It wasn't that I resented her achievements. Lila was talented, smart, and yes, beautiful. What cut me to the bone was how there seemed to be no room for anyone else in our family's universe. Her shine wasn't just bright, it was blinding, and I was always caught in the shadow it cast. For years, I tried to fight it. I tried to run faster, study harder, look prettier, speak louder, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. Because in their eyes, there was only ever room for one star, and her name was Lila. Sukormid. The years blur together in my mind, stitched with small cuts that never healed. It wasn't always dramatic, not always shouting or anger. It was the little things, the constant belittling that wore me down like water against stone. My family had 1,000 ways of reminding me I wasn't enough, and most of them came wrapped in laughter. They called me nicknames that stuck like glue. Plain Jane, even though my name is Isabella. Duckling, because I wasn't as graceful as Lila. Once, when I tripped walking into a family gathering, my father laughed and muttered, "Clumsy Bella strikes again," loud enough for everyone to hear. From then on, cousins repeated it like a joke, shouting, "Careful, Clumsy Bella," whenever I walked into a room. I smiled tightly, but inside, I wanted to disappear. The backhanded comments were constant. My mother would sigh when Lila twirled in a new dress, praising her beauty, then glance at me with a half smile and say, "Isabella has her own charm. Or worse, at least you're smart." As though intelligence was just a consolation prize, a participation ribbon for someone who would never measure up. Even my appearance was fair game. At a barbecue, an uncle once laughed, "You'll be the funny one, Bella, because Lila took all the looks." Everyone chuckled, and I laughed along, because what else could I do? Even when I achieved something, it was swallowed by silence. In 8th grade, I won an essay competition. I had stayed up late for weeks, researching, rewriting, pouring myself into every word. When the certificate was handed to me at the ceremony, my heart swelled with pride. That night at dinner, I brought it up, hoping maybe this time they'd see me. My father nodded distractedly, then turned to Lila and asked about her next dance recital. My essay never came up again. The cruel laughter stung the worst. It wasn't always what was said, but how. My family had a way of making a joke out of me, turning me into entertainment. If I stumbled over a word, if I didn't get the punchline right, if I asked a question they thought was obvious, it was open season. Lila would mimic me at the table, exaggerating my voice until everyone laughed. I'd feel the heat rise in my face, my fists clenched in my lap, but no one stepped in. They told me I was too sensitive when I tried to protest. Over time, I learned what they really wanted from me: silence. To sit quietly, to fade into the background, to take the barbs without complaint so the family's perfect image stayed intact. If I smiled while being ridiculed, it kept the peace. If I swallowed my anger, no one had to admit the truth. That cruelty had become our family's favorite pastime, and I was their target. It wasn't just neglect. It was erasure. Little by little, they laughed me out of the picture, until I almost believed I wasn't meant to be seen at all. The words rang in my ears long after the laughter faded, louder than the clinking of glasses or the scrape of forks against porcelain. "How does it feel to be the ugly one?" Lila had said it with a smile, her tone light, playful, as if it were nothing more than a passing joke. But her eyes, sharp, deliberate, told me it was meant to wound. And it landed. God, it landed. I sat there frozen, my fork heavy in my hand, unable to breathe as the table erupted. My father chuckled, shaking his head like it was harmless. My mother gave a soft laugh before muttering a half-hearted, "Now, Lila." But even she didn't sound upset. A few cousins outright cackled, and one of my uncles slapped the table, gasping for air from how funny he thought it was. The room pulsed with laughter, but none of it belonged to me. It wasn't the first time they had used me as the punchline. I'd been called clumsy, plain, invisible, all under the guise of teasing. but this time felt different. Maybe because of how public it was. Maybe because of how cruelly blatant it had become. Or maybe because something inside me had finally cracked. I looked around the table, searching for even one face that looked uncomfortable. One person willing to say enough was enough. But all I saw were grins, shoulders shaking with amusement, wine glasses raised mid-toast as if this was the best entertainment they'd had in months. My mother's eyes caught mine briefly, but instead of shame or regret, I saw something worse. Acceptance. As if this was simply the role I was meant to play. The ugly one. The food in front of me blurred. I could no longer taste the roast chicken or the buttery potatoes I'd been eating just moments before. My throat was tight, my chest aching, but I didn't speak. Because what would I even say? They had already decided who I was, and nothing I said would change it. It wasn't just Lila's words that shattered me. It was their laughter, all of them, united in the sound of my humiliation. That was the moment I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. There was no space for me at that table. No matter how much I worked, no matter how kind I tried to be, no matter how much I hoped, this house would never give me respect. I excused myself quietly, my chair scraping against the floor. A few people glanced up, but no one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. They just let me walk out of the room as if I had never been there. In the hallway mirror, I caught sight of my reflection, red cheeks, glassy eyes, lips trembling, and for the first time, I didn't pity the girl staring back. I pitied them. Because they had no idea what they had just done. They hadn't just hurt me with a cruel joke. They had broken whatever fragile thread kept me tethered to them. And once that thread snapped, I knew I would never look at that family the same way again. I remember standing in the hallway that night, my coat draped over my arm, the muffled sound of their laughter still echoing from the dining room. They hadn't even noticed I'd left the table. No one followed, no one asked if I was okay. They were still enjoying themselves, still basking in the glow of their perfect family moment, even though they had just used me as the punchline. That was when I knew. I couldn't stay here anymore. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not in this house where my very existence was a joke. I slipped on my shoes in silence, the familiar weight of them grounding me. Each movement felt deliberate, final, like the motions of someone stepping onto a path they couldn't turn back from. I wasn't packing bags or making a dramatic announcement. I wasn't going to slam a door or scream my pain. I had already screamed enough on the inside, and no one had ever heard it. This time, I would speak in the only language they seemed to understand, absence. The front door creaked softly as I opened it, the cool night air rushing in, sharp and bracing against my skin. For a moment I stood there, caught between the warmth of the house I grew up in and the unknown darkness outside. The house was polished, well lit, and filled with all the trappings of success, a house that looked like stability but never gave me any. The darkness was uncertain, but at least it was mine to claim. I stepped out and let the door fall shut behind me. The sound was soft, but in my chest it thundered like the closing of a chapter. I walked down the driveway without looking back, the gravel crunching under my shoes like punctuation to every thought in my head. No more. No more trying. No more begging for scraps of respect. The world outside was harsh. I knew that. Rent wasn't cheap, jobs didn't magically appear, and loneliness wasn't something I could run away from just by leaving home. But as I walked toward my car, I realized I would rather face the harshness of the world alone than endure the cruelty of family pretending to love me. At least the world didn't owe me anything. At least strangers wouldn't pretend I mattered, only to laugh in my face later. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, not from fear, but from release. I didn't have a clear plan yet. I didn't know where I'd land or how I'd make it all work. But I knew this. I would find a way. I would carve out a life that belonged to me, one that didn't shrink every time Lila smiled or every time my parents compared me to her. As I pulled away from the house, its glowing windows growing smaller in the rearview mirror, I felt a strange, quiet freedom settle into me. For once, I wasn't running toward their approval. I was walking away. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, it was mine. And that made it beautiful. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor because I didn't have a couch yet. The place was tiny, just one room with creaky floors, a bathroom that echoed when the pipes rattled, and a kitchen barely big enough for a hot plate and a microwave. The walls were bare, the air smelled faintly of old paint, and the only light came from a single lamp I'd borrowed from a thrift shop. To anyone else, it would have looked depressing. To me, it looked like freedom. I ate instant noodles straight from the pot, steam curling up into the dim light. It wasn't the roast chicken my mother used to make, or the catered dinners Lila posted online, but it tasted better than anything I had eaten at that table. Because no one was laughing at me here. No one was comparing me, diminishing me, or calling me names. I was alone, but I was finally breathing. The mornings came early. I woke to the sound of buses hissing down the street and neighbors clattering up the stairs. I worked long hours at a marketing firm, barely above entry level, and the pay was just enough to cover rent and groceries. After work, I picked up extra shifts at a bookstore down the block, stocking shelves and cashing out customers until late into the night. I came home exhausted, sometimes too tired to even boil those noodles, but every time I turned the key to my own door, I felt proud. Survival mode was brutal. I clipped coupons, skipped nights out, and became an expert at stretching $10 into 3 days' worth of meals. I learned how to hand wash clothes in the sink to save on laundromats, how to fix a leaky faucet from YouTube tutorials, and how to ignore the hum of loneliness when the nights got too quiet. I worked until my eyes burned, but the exhaustion was different now. It belonged to me. It wasn't the exhaustion of carrying a family's contempt. It was the exhaustion of building something on my own. Every so often, I'd scroll through social media, seeing Lila's glamorous life unfold, dinners at rooftop restaurants, smiling family photos in front of their pool, my parents beaming with pride. For a moment, the ache would come back, sharp and heavy. But then I'd look around my little apartment. The chipped counters, the thrifted plates, the single potted plant I'd bought with my first paycheck, and I'd remember that this was mine. All of it. No one could take it away from me, or make me feel small inside of it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. My apartment may have been the size of a shoebox, my meals simple, my days long and grueling, but they were mine. And that freedom, that fragile sense of ownership over my life, was worth more than all the picture-perfect dinners and staged holiday cards I had left behind. For the first time, even in struggle, I felt alive. The shift didn't happen overnight. At first, every day felt like a battle. Between bills and deadlines, between exhaustion and the ache of being alone. But little by little, I began to invest in myself. It started small, with things no one else would even notice. I cooked a real meal instead of reaching for instant noodles, just to prove to myself I could. I joined a cheap gym down the block, walking there after work even when my body begged to collapse. I signed up for evening classes to sharpen my skills, pushing myself because for the first time, I wasn't doing it to earn my parents' approval. I was doing it for me. At the office, I stopped shrinking back. I used to let louder voices dominate, terrified that if I spoke up and stumbled, it would be another reason to laugh at me. But now, when a client presentation came up, I volunteered. My hands shook, my heart pounded, but I got through it. And to my surprise, people listened. They clapped. My boss nodded with real approval, not the hollow, distracted kind I'd grown up with. It was the first time I realized my voice carried weight, and it lit a spark inside me. One promotion turned into another. Soon, I wasn't just scraping by. I was climbing. My work ethic, the same one they had dismissed as invisible, was finally seen and valued. The girl they once called the ugly one was being recognized as sharp, capable, and essential. I started to see it too. For the first time, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't just see flaws. I saw someone strong enough to survive cruelty and still rise. Outside of work, I found people who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. A coworker named Jenna became my closest friend. She noticed things others overlooked. The way I always brought coffee for the interns, the way I stayed late to help without being asked. One night, after I'd vented about a tough week, she looked at me and said, "Bella, you don't even know how amazing you are, do you?" The words hit me harder than I expected, because I realized she meant them. And I realized no one in my family had ever said anything like that to me. I built a circle slowly. Friends from work, neighbors in my building, even people at the gym who cheered when I managed to lift more weight than last week. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't picture perfect, but it was real. They celebrated me without comparison, without backhanded compliments, without cruelty. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not because I was flawless, not because I was someone's shadow, but because I was me. The ache of my family's neglect still lingered, but it didn't define me anymore. I was building something stronger, piece by piece, a career I was proud of, a body that felt healthy, friendships that filled the silence. I had always been told I wasn't enough, but now, standing on my own 2 feet, I finally saw the truth. I was more than enough, and I always had been. Scrolling through my phone late at night became a dangerous habit, one I couldn't seem to break. After long days at the office, after dinners eaten alone at my kitchen table, I'd end up on social media, staring at a world that didn't want me in it. There they were, my family, frozen in perfect little squares. Lila with her polished smile, Mom and Dad beaming beside her, glasses raised at some expensive restaurant. The caption read, "Family dinner nights are the best nights. Family." The word felt like a slap. I wasn't there, of course. My chair had been empty, but no one mentioned it. No one tagged me. To the world outside, it looked like the Hartmans were whole, happy, and glowing with love. My absence was the unspoken truth in every picture, the shadow carefully cropped out. It wasn't just dinners. There were vacations, too. Lila and my parents on a beach in matching sun hats. Lila by the pool holding a cocktail while Mom wrote, "So proud of our girl, living her best life." I remembered begging once, years ago, to be included in those captions, to have my own accomplishments shared. When I'd won first place in an essay competition, when I got into my college of choice, when I was promoted at work. But there had never been posts for me. No bragging rights, no celebration. Only silence. Now, the silence had become permanent. It was as though I'd never existed in that house at all. I studied the photos carefully, looking for traces of myself. A family gathering where I used to sit at the corner of the table. Now the camera angle simply cut the corner out. A holiday photo where stockings once hung with all our names. Only 3 now, embroidered in gold thread. Mom, Dad, Lila. Mine had been erased like it had never belonged. The comments stung almost as much as the photos. What a beautiful family. Goals. Lila, you're so lucky to have such supportive parents. I'd stare at those words until my chest ached, wondering if anyone else noticed the missing piece. But of course they didn't. The Hartmans were perfect, and perfect families didn't have invisible daughters. I tried telling myself I didn't care. I reminded myself that my life was fuller than it had ever been. Promotions at work, friends who celebrated me, a body and mind I was finally learning to care for. But some nights, staring at those pictures, the ache returned. It wasn't the longing to go back. I knew I could never go back. It was the reminder of what I had never been given. The acceptance, the pride, the simple joy of being included without conditions. Lila's smile gleamed in every frame, flawless and untouched. My absence gleamed too in its own way. A silent truth no filter could hide. I had never been wanted, and though the world couldn't see it, I could, and it was enough to remind me why I had walked away. Success gave me a kind of armor, but it didn't make me invincible. I had a good job now, a salary that let me trade in instant noodles for real meals, and a circle of friends who clapped the loudest when I hit milestones. I had proof that I was capable, that I could build a life outside the shadows my family left me in. But no matter how far I climbed, there were moments when the ache came back, sharp and unexpected, like pressing on a bruise you thought had healed. It happened at the simplest times. Sitting in the office break room, I watched a coworker's phone light up. Her dad had texted, "Proud of you, kiddo. Dinner tonight on me." She smiled, showing me the screen. I smiled back, but my chest tightened. My phone sat silent on the table beside me, no texts waiting, no calls missed. My parents had never once told me they were proud, not when I worked overtime to land a client, not when I moved into my own place, not even when I finally started believing in myself. Other times it hit at airports. I'd watch people reunite with their families, hugs and tears spilling out at the arrival gate, parents with balloons, siblings waving frantically, laughter echoing down the terminal. I always walked through alone, headphones in, carrying my own bags. There was no one waiting for me at baggage claim, no one counting down the minutes until I came home. Even dinners with friends carried their sting. Sitting around a table, I'd listen as they swapped stories about nagging moms or overprotective dads, siblings who borrowed clothes without asking or called at midnight for advice. They complained, rolled their eyes, laughed, but beneath it all was love, messy and loud and unconditional. I laughed with them too, but there was always a part of me that wanted to excuse myself, just like I had at that dinner table years ago. Because hearing what others had only reminded me of what I'd never known. I told myself I was stronger now, and in many ways I was. But strength doesn't erase longing. I could walk away from their cruelty, but I couldn't walk away from the part of me that still craved what every child craves: to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved without conditions. That part of me sat quietly at the edge of every success, whispering, would it matter more if they saw it? The ache wasn't constant anymore. It didn't drown me like it used to, but it lingered, waiting for quiet moments to resurface. Like a shadow at the edge of the light, reminding me that no matter how many promotions or friendships I earned, there would always be a hollow space where my family should have been. And some days, no matter how far I'd come, that emptiness felt louder than everything I'd built. The first whisper came through a cousin at a wedding, her voice lowered as if speaking a scandal. She leaned across the table, eyes darting to make sure no one else was listening, and said, "Your dad's firm isn't doing well, is it?" I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't spoken to my parents in months, hadn't asked, hadn't cared to. But apparently, the neighbors had noticed the for sale sign go up in front of one of his investment properties. Apparently, the big projects that used to keep his name on the lips of the town were drying up. I brushed it off at first, but more whispers followed. An old friend from high school, who still lived near my parents, mentioned in passing that my mother had gone back to tutoring kids after school. "She says it's just for fun," the friend laughed, "but people think it's to make ends meet." I felt a strange twist in my stomach. My mother, who had once boasted about never needing to scramble like other families, now quietly stitching together side work. And then there was Lila. Her glossy photos still filled my feed, dinners at rooftop restaurants, perfectly styled outfits, captions about gratitude and family. But I noticed small things. The designer handbag she used to rotate every week appeared again and again, the same few recycled in different angles. The vacations looked shorter, closer to home. One post about a weekend getaway turned out to be at a budget hotel dressed up to look luxurious. I wouldn't have noticed before, but I had learned to read between the lines. What really confirmed it came from someone unexpected. Jenna, my closest friend at work, bumped into one of Lila's old classmates at a networking event. The girl mentioned, with a sly smile, "Your friend's sister is trying to get sponsorships now. Influencer stuff. Guess the family money's not flowing the way it used to." Jenna told me over coffee, and for a long time I just stirred my cup, staring at the swirl of cream mixing with black. The perfect Hartman world wasn't so perfect anymore. Their suburban palace had cracks in the walls, financial and otherwise, and the shiny surface they polished for the world was beginning to dull. Strangely, I didn't feel joy right away. For years, I had imagined what it would be like to see their empire stumble, to watch the smug certainty on their faces falter. But sitting there in that cafe, hearing about their unraveling, I mostly felt detached. Maybe that was the real shift of power. For the first time in my life, their fate didn't define mine. Their struggles weren't mine to solve. Their image wasn't mine to uphold. They had chosen to erase me, to laugh me out of their picture. Now, as the cracks showed, I realized something important. I didn't have to laugh back or even care. Their downfall belonged to them. My life, finally, belonged to me. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was finishing a report for work. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months. Lila. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, to pretend I never saw it. But another part, the part that had carried the echo of her cruel laughter all these years, wanted to hear what she had to say. I pressed accept. "Isabella," she said, her tone clipped, controlled. It wasn't warmth that laced her voice, but something else, desperation dressed up as authority. "Finally, I've been trying to reach you." I leaned back in my chair. "Have you?" My voice was calm, cooler than I felt inside. "Yes," she said quickly, as though rehearsed. "Listen, I need to ask, why? Why did you stop coming around? Why cut us off? Mom and Dad keep asking, and honestly, I don't know what to tell them." The question hung heavy, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. As if she didn't remember the dinners, the nicknames, the cruel little jokes that had built the foundation of my silence. As if she hadn't been the one to drive the knife in deeper that night with her words. "How does it feel to be the ugly one?" "Why?" I echoed slowly. "You really don't know why, Lila?" She sighed, the kind of sigh that implied I was being difficult. "Look, you've always been sensitive, but we're family. Families fight, families tease. That's normal." The word tease made my skin prickle. That was her way of shrinking years of cruelty into something harmless. She was trying to reframe history in her favor, but I stayed quiet, letting her keep talking. "And," she added, her voice softening in a way that didn't feel natural, "things aren't easy right now. Dad's firm is, well, it's struggling, and Mom's been stressed. I've been doing everything I can, but you know how it is. We could really use some help. You're doing well, right? I see your little updates online. You've got your own place, a good job. You've made something of yourself. That's great. But don't forget where you came from." There it was. The real reason for the call. Not because they missed me. Not because she finally realized how deep the wound went. But because now, suddenly, I was useful. Their golden picture was cracking, and they needed someone to patch it together. I sat in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle. I could hear the faint sound of her tapping her nails against something, impatient. "Isabella?" she pressed. "Don't you have anything to say?" I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. Oh, I had plenty to say. But for the first time, I realized I wasn't the one who owed anyone explanations. The balance had shifted. She was the one calling me now, not the other way around. I let the silence stretch until Lila's confidence began to fray. For once, she didn't sound untouchable. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady in a way it had never been when I was under their roof. You want to know why I stopped coming around? Let's start with the night at dinner, when you looked me in the eye and asked how it felt to be the ugly one. Do you remember that? Everyone laughed, except me. She started to protest, but I cut her off. That wasn't teasing. That wasn't family banter. That was cruelty. And it wasn't just one night, Lila. It was years of it. The nicknames, the constant comparisons, every win of mine minimized, every stumble magnified, birthdays forgotten, accomplishments brushed aside, and then that final dinner where Mom screamed at me to get out and never come back. And none of you, not even you, said a word in my defense. On the other end of the line, I heard her breathing quicken. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed excuse ready. I walked away, I continued, because I finally believed what you'd all been telling me for years, that you didn't want me there, and when I stopped showing up, you erased me completely. Your photos, your captions about family, your curated little image. I didn't just vanish, Lila. You made me vanish. There was a long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, shaken. I didn't realize it was that bad. I thought you just didn't care. That's because you never looked past your own reflection, I said. You were too busy soaking up the spotlight to see the sister standing in the shadows. You benefited from their favoritism. You laughed with them at my expense. You didn't just ignore it, you joined in. She didn't deny it. For once, Lila, the golden child, the untouchable one, was silent. I could almost feel her walls cracking. And then, as if clinging to the script she had started with, she whispered, "But we really do need help. Dad's firm might go under. Mom's worried sick. I can't do this alone." There it was, the plea hidden under the pride. But I felt no pull this time, no desperate need to earn their acceptance by saving them. "I'm sorry, Lila," I said, and I meant it. "But I won't be the one to fix what they broke. You're asking me to give back to a family that never gave me anything but scars. I built my life without you. I'm not going to sacrifice it to prop up the illusion you all care so much about." Her breath caught, and I knew my answer had landed. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilt. I felt free. My phone buzzed later with messages from friends, real friends, asking how I was, checking in, reminding me I wasn't alone. That was my family now, the circle I had chosen. They laughed at me for being the ugly one, but I built a life more beautiful than they'll ever know. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe. Until the next time.